Hi, my name is Kamila binti MOHAMED and my metric number is 061547. Here, I will explain the meaning of conflict of interest in general. The widely used definition of conflict of interest is that a conflict of interest is a set of conditions that includes the possibility that somehow a secondary interest will sway judgment or subsequent actions regarding a primary concern. The prime concern relates to the profession's or action's main goals such as consumer safety, client wellness, academic decency, and general populace lieutenant's responsibilities. The individual advantage is included in secondary interest, which involves not just personal profit but also intentions like the wish for career progression or the willingness of doing kindness for relatives. Secondary interests are not considered abnormal or even of themselves, but they have become difficult when they have been told to have greater significance than main interest.
Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. I am FAIZAH binti JUWARI with matrix number 061453. Would like to share about conflict of interest and the types of it. A conflict of interest occurs when an individual becomes unreliable because of a clash between personal interest and professional duties. It is occurred when the interests raise a question of whether their actions, judgment, or decision-making can be unbiased. Conflicts of interest often have legal ramifications. Ramification means complex consequences of an action, which the prevention of this conflict under the Malaysian legal framework falls under the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, shortened as MACC, and the Companies Commission of Malaysia, shortened as SSM. These conflicts of interest are divided into two types, which is potential conflict of interest and actual conflict of interest. The potential conflict of interest was met when an employee has an interest that could potentially affect the way he makes decisions for the employer, but he has yet to be assigned such a responsibility or task to make the decision. Or I can say in another word, potential conflict of interest is not an actual conflict, but in time, it could be. An issue for potential conflict of interest are nepotism that happens when an individual in charge of hiring process chose to award a job offer to someone from their own family or a person that have personal relationship with them. The potential conflict that can arise is the loyalty with the family member and the company or employer, and the conflict will happen for choosing a family member to receive the benefits of the job instead of to stay with the job under an unknown person. This is also considered for a direct interest and indirect interest. Direct interests are meant as an individual's own personal self-interest, family interest, and personal business interest, while indirect interest means personal, family, and business interests of people or groups with whom the individual associates. That's all from me. Thank you.
Next one is the actual conflict. Actual conflict is the interest is considered as direct conflict affected decision making. Actual conflict is different with the potential, because the interest will influence the employee decision making and give the authority to make the decision as employer. A conflict of interest occurs when an individual's personal interests such as family, friendship, financial, or social factors that could compromise his or her judgment, decision, or action in the workplace. Government agencies take conflict of interest so seriously that they are regulated. A conflict of interest is a situation in which an individual has competing interests or loyalties. A conflict of interest can exist in many different situations. Actual conflict is the one type in interest conflicts. Actual conflicts of interest arise when there is a direct conflict between a staff member's duties and responsibilities and their personal interests which influence the performance of those duties. It explains about the conflicts with the essential duties and personal responsibilities involved between works and personal things. This conflict involves between two social values. These are situations in which there is a real conflict of interest with an employee or a company. An example of actual conflict of interest occurs when an employee who is authorized to approve business expenses is a family member or friend of the personnel being approved for those business expenses. The firm must assign a different approval in cases like this as part of management plan and implement controls to mitigate the risk of conflict of interest. The actual of potential conflict of interest is because of the remuneration arrangement, intra-group relationship, shareholding and ownership arrangements, and lastly because of social relationship.
Example for potential conflict. Example 1. Mr. Azwan, the manager of a marketing department, date a co-worker who is Miss Ira, also a manager in the same department in company SK Holding Berhad. But they part way over time when he is promoted to the marketing department for being director role. Suddenly, Miss Ira finds herself being reported by Mr. Azwan according the lack of discipline in the workplace. The existence of the former relationship between them create a potential conflict of interest, especially in the eyes of co-worker of the company. The company is forced to change the reporting of the department she managed, even though the management, Miss Ira, and director, Mr. Azwan, are not longer dating. This is to prevent other employees from not longer respecting both manager and the occurrence of misunderstanding. The company is hiding the fault of someone who has certain rank in the organization. By separating them can open the eyes that the company is serious to avoid environment of potential conflict, so that there is low potential conflict in the workplace and improve the employees' behavior. Example 2, NHR, who is Mr. Shahrul, the director of company, decide to investigate a formal charge of sexual harassment using internal resource that he control against a fellow corporate executive who he has known and worked with professionally for years. Mr. Ardin has been charged with sexual harassment of one of his staff. Mr. Shahrul, who know Mr. Ard's behavior, want to manage this case because he think that Mr. Ard is innocent. That will not constitute a conflict of interest if he hire an external employment law firm to conduct the investigation and recommend disciplinary measure so that his good name is maintained. This is to avoid other employees assuming Mr. Shahrul is hiding justice for defending Mr. Ard, who is accused of sexual harassment.
Assalamualaikum, my name is NAJWAN HAQIMI bin JEFRI and I will give some examples of actual conflict of interest. The first one is self-dealing. Self-dealing occurs when a person, usually a high-ranking official within a large corporation, acts in their own best interest in a transaction at the expense of the business or their clients. They may use the company's money or access for personal betterment at the expense of the business. It represents an illegal act that can lead to litigation, penalties, and termination of employment for those who commit it. For example, the Chief Financial Officer or CFO at a manufacturing firm has recently learned that the company will soon acquire a company called Arnold Production. The CFO used this information to boost their stock portfolio before releasing the news of the acquisition. This insider trading is not only a conflict of interest, but it is also illegal. Next, nepotism. Nepotism is a form of favoritism that is granted to family members or friends. Usually, these favors, benefits, or job opportunities are awarded to family members based on relationship rather than qualification. For example, the human resources manager at a rental company is in charge of hiring a new employee in their customer service department. One of the candidates is the HR manager's child. Despite the child lack of experience in the industry as compared to other top candidates, the HR manager still decides to hire their child anyway. After that, there is the most common actual conflict of interest in the non-profit sector, which is excess compensation. Excess compensation occurs when the organization pays an employee, usually high-ranking with substantial social or political influence, far more than they do other similar roles or comparable roles in other organizations. Example, a national non-profit organization that helps pair underprivileged jobs such as with Fortune 500 companies in need of employees needs a new director of philanthropy. It selects a former government staffer with substantial political connections and offers them a salary 2 times that of its previous director of philanthropy. Lastly, stock manipulation. A very specific but highly impactful conflict of interest is stock manipulation. It occurs when a stockbroker uses their position to promote the value of a security. They artificially inflate the price and then sell their shares at a profit. For example, Henry owns a substantial amount of shares of a security, hoping to make money on the investment quickly. Henry spreads rumors about its valuation and encourage peers to purchase this security. It quickly increased in value and Harry cashed out, making a substantial profit. That's all from me. Thank you.
In conclusion, a conflict of interest arises if a person's personal interests, such as community, socialization, finance, or social aspects, may impair their identity or their decisions, choices, or behavior at work. State agencies take conflicts of interest so seriously that they have been tightly controlled. Due to the obvious relations versus guidelines or legislative acts, different kinds of conflicts of interest could spring up. A customer can quickly get to be biased due to minor factors such as companionship, meals, or adulation, and they might be affected to make a choice due to the possibility of regaining control, recognition, or income. Issues can occur when anyone tends to make or affect an action for personal benefit that might be unrealistic, dishonest, or indeed wrong. Furthermore, the effects of conflicts of interest can cause problems in a business culture. The company's culture may be imperiled if it is not alert to understanding and fixing conflicts of interest, particularly at the top management level.